Welcome to Xi Jinping Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Biden says it's possible he meets with Chinese President Xi next month. Questions about jail wristbands in Georgia. Your weekly non-Beltway political stories. The fast-growing energy source which will power the future, yes, it's coal. In Berkeley, Indigenous Peoples Day is a decades-old tradition. Taliban vows to protect Chinese citizens in Afghanistan as our own. Biden says it's possible he meets with Chinese President Xi next month. The Independent. President Joe Biden has said that a meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping could take place during the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation (APEC) Leaders Summit in San Francisco next month. While no meeting has been confirmed, top Biden administration officials have been working to arrange a bilateral meeting between the two leaders. The potential meeting comes amid ongoing tensions between the U.S. and China over military buildup and the status of Taiwan. Military-to-military communications between the two countries have been halted since August 2022. The last meeting between Biden and Xi was in 2022, and relations have remained strained since a Chinese-made espionage balloon transited U.S. airspace earlier this year. Questions about jail wristbands in Georgia. Your weekly non-Beltway political stories. Washington Post. Fulton County, GA, commissioners in the U.S. have questioned the utility and cost of $2.1 million worth of wristbands that were intended to track inmate health. The wristbands were meant to be introduced by July, but only 13 had been deployed by the end of September. Talatrix CEO Justin Hawkins blamed the delay on inmate deaths and a lack of deputies to oversee installation. Meanwhile, a lawyer named Matt Widener is said to have significantly increased the number of foreclosure lawsuits filed by Florida cities, including 57 last year in Fort Pierce, which had filed just one in the previous 5 years. The fast-growing energy source which will power the future, yes, it's coal. Telegraph. China and India continue to prioritize coal usage and maintain their national energy security, while the U.S. is rapidly retiring its coal-fired power plants in pursuit of climate change goals, according to an op-ed by David Blackman. He argues that the U.S. approach may lead to instability on the power grid due to the increasing reliance on weather-dependent wind and solar generation. Meanwhile, India's state-owned energy giant NTPC reported an 83% increase in coal mining during the first half of the 2023-24 fiscal year, while China permits 1 to 2 new coal-fired power plants every week. In Berkeley, Indigenous Peoples Day is a decades-old tradition. New York Times. A dozen states and more than 100 cities will celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday, a holiday intended both to honor native cultures and to offer something of a rebuke to Columbus Day. In 2021, President Biden became the first U.S. president to formally recognize the holiday, a signal of its growing acceptance. Taliban vows to protect Chinese citizens in Afghanistan as our own. The Independent. The Taliban has promised to protect China from terrorist threats in Afghanistan. The pledge comes after a series of attacks on Chinese workers in the country. China has been increasing its trade and infrastructure links with the Taliban regime and was the first major power to restore its embassy in Kabul after the group's takeover. Experts fear that China's support for the Taliban will weaken Western diplomatic efforts to pressure the group on issues such as women's rights and religious freedoms. No country, including China, has formally recognized the Taliban as the legitimate rulers of Afghanistan. Biden planning to meet China's Xi Jinping in San Francisco. Telegraph. The White House is reportedly planning a face-to-face meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping in San Francisco next month. The meeting is seen as an effort to stabilize relations between the two countries, which have been strained in recent years due to various issues including Taiwan, the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, allegations of spying, human rights concerns, and trade tariffs. While the possibility of the meeting is described as pretty firm by U.S. officials, the Chinese embassy in Washington did not comment specifically on the report. The last time the two leaders met in person was 6 years ago when she visited former U.S. President Donald Trump in Florida. Yellen to focus on World Bank and China at global meetings. Bloomberg. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is expected to discuss World Bank reform, meet with senior Chinese officials, and potentially discuss ways to limit Russia's revenue from oil sales during an upcoming 9-day international trip. Yellen will attend the annual meetings of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank in Marrakesh, Morocco, where she will deliver a speech on World Bank reforms. Yellen may also meet with Chinese counterparts to further improve economic relations between the two countries. Additionally, she will discuss increasing IMF quotas and address issues surrounding debt restructuring deals for low-income countries. A stock trader's guide for visit of U.S. Senate group to China. Bloomberg. Traders are optimistic that a visit by U.S. senators to China next week may help improve bilateral relations and boost sentiment towards Chinese assets. The visit by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Republican Senator Mike Crapo could lead to broader two-way talks and potentially pave the way for a meeting between Presidents Joe Biden and Xi Jinping. Any progress made on issues such as the treatment of U.S. technology firms in China, national security, or green energy could deliver a positive surprise for the market. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the sixth dimension, here to bring you the latest news and analysis from around the world. Let's dive right in. First up, we have President Biden's possible meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping at the upcoming APEC Leaders Summit. The tension between the U.S. and China has been high, with issues like military buildup and the status of Taiwan causing strain. A meeting between the two leaders could potentially ease some of these tensions, but we will have to wait and see if it actually happens. Next, we turn to Georgia, where wristbands meant to track inmate health have caused quite a stir. Only a fraction of the wristbands have been deployed, and questions have been raised about their utility and cost. It seems like there's been some mismanagement here, and it's definitely a topic worth keeping an eye on. Now, let's talk about coal, the energy source that just won't quit. While the U.S. is retiring coal-fired power plants in pursuit of climate change goals, China and India are doubling down on coal usage. This has raised concerns about the stability of the power grid in the U.S., as it becomes increasingly reliant on weather-dependent wind and solar generation. It's a classic case of different countries prioritizing different things, and the consequences could be significant. Moving on, we have Indigenous Peoples Day, a holiday that honors native cultures and serves as a rebuke to Columbus Day. This year, more states and cities are celebrating this day, showing its growing acceptance. It's a step towards recognizing and honoring the history and contributions of Indigenous peoples, and it's great to see it gaining traction. In a surprising turn of events, the Taliban has promised to protect Chinese citizens in Afghanistan. This comes after a series of attacks on Chinese workers in the country. China has been strengthening its ties with the Taliban, and this support could undermine Western efforts to pressure the group on issues like women's rights and religious freedoms. It's a delicate situation, and one that could have far-reaching implications. And speaking of China, President Biden is reportedly planning to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in San Francisco next month. This meeting could be a significant step towards stabilizing the strained relations between the two countries. There are a lot of issues on the table, from Taiwan to the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, and a face-to-face meeting could help address these concerns. We'll have to wait and see if it actually happens, but it's definitely a development to watch. Next, we have U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's upcoming international trip, where she will discuss World Bank reform, meet with Chinese officials, and potentially address Russia's revenue from oil sales. Yellen's trip highlights the importance of global economic relations and the need for cooperation to address pressing issues. It will be interesting to see what comes out of these meetings and if any progress is made. Now, let's talk about NIO, the Chinese electric car company that is facing significant losses. Despite investing heavily in research and development, NIO is losing $55,000 on each car it sells. However, the company, along with other Chinese electric car companies, has strong government backing that allows it to withstand these losses and continue to grow. It's an interesting dynamic and a reminder of the role government support can play in certain industries. Lastly, we have the visit of U.S. senators to China, which traders are optimistic about. The visit could lead to broader talks and potentially pave the way for a meeting between Presidents Biden and Xi. Any progress made on issues like the treatment of U.S. technology firms in China or green energy could boost market sentiment. It's a reminder of how politics and international relations can impact the market. And there you have it, folks. A whirlwind tour of some of the latest news stories. Now, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on these topics? Do you have any questions? Let's keep the discussion going. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6 Do Brief via email.